The sense of wonder and adventure generated by video games is something that resonates deep inside my being. When I was 7 years old, I was used to playing video games for the PlayStation like Donald Duck Going Quackers, Tigger's Honey Hunt, or a personal favorite, Ratchet and Clank. At the time, all I thought the computer was good for was occasionally playing the educational games my parents had bought, like Carmen Sandiego or Hooked on Phonics. But those didn't fit my idea of fun quite like smashing robots and traveling through the galaxy. But on one fateful day in 2005, my dad came home with a new video game to play with his coworkers. Not a game designed for the PlayStation, but one made for the desktop computer. I didn't know it at the time, but the time spent playing this game with my dad and his coworkers would forever shape the way I learn and interact with the world. On that day, I entered the world of Warcraft. From the moment I created my first character, left the starting area, ignored all the starting quests, and took off into the snowy hills of Dunmorrow, I was hooked. The vast and tranquil landscape stretched out before me, complete with snow-covered peaks, pine forests, and dwarven strongholds carved out of the mountainside. I was compelled to explore, to run into areas of the game I wasn't high enough level to be in, just to see what all was out there. My trek was cut short, however, as I followed a path uphill to a Yeti cave where I was promptly killed by the rare level 9 Yeti, Edan the Howler. I cried until my brother reassured me that I could return as a ghost and find my body to be resurrected. This first journey into the snows of Dunmorrow ignited my love for the game and pushed me to make a character in every starting zone, just to experience the unique corners of Azeroth. Over thousands of hours of gameplay, these places are etched into my memory as clear as places I know in the real world. I can tell you how to reach the hidden waterfall in Elwyn Forest, which is the tallest peak in the Barrens, and what the quickest route is across the ocean from the Eastern Kingdoms to Kalimdor. The virtual landscape, both in map and visual form, is like second nature to me. And as expansions to the game were released, this knowledge grew and changed with each new edition. For me, and for so many others, virtual landscapes are a part of our understanding of the world. As we go through our waking lives, our actions and understandings are occasionally shaped by the meaning and memories embedded in the places we inhabit virtually. And for millions of people, World of Warcraft was just the beginning. 17 years later, game design has come a long way. Advances in computer technology have allowed for new titles to be developed with incredible graphics and meticulously detailed simulations of the real-world environment. The values and meaning developers and players place onto these simulated environments combine to create each game's unique virtual landscape. One game in particular stands out as a fantastic example of this phenomenon, inviting players to step into the wild American West of 1899. The virtual landscape of Red Dead Redemption 2 brings with it a slew of incredibly specific ecological phenomena that a player can observe, interact with, and come to know. There are roughly 200 species of animals and 40 different plants that players can learn to distinguish through direct encounters. When you aren't completing the main story missions, players can roam about the world doing pretty much whatever they want, including simply taking a hike to explore the vast and beautiful landscape. While in the wilderness, players can hunt and fish, search for birds using binoculars, and set up camp to cook and craft using the materials they collect from these interactions. Each of these activities connects players to their environment and generates specific ecological knowledge that builds players' expertise in parsing the subtleties of the virtual landscape. Most of my time spent in-game has been hunting animals and crafting equipment and clothing from their hides. As a result of 120 plus hours of this, I'm intimately familiar with things such as the behaviors of animals, how bighorn sheep and bucks will fight one another, sometimes ending with deer locked together at the horns, one alive and one struggling to get free from the other. I also know where certain animal territories are in case I want to hunt one animal in particular for its hide, teeth, or horns. For example, I know that cougars tend to be found in the Blackbone Forest within West Elizabeth's Big Valley. If, God forbid, you wanted to hunt a jaguar to craft an improved satchel, I know that you could typically find one far down south at Old Hairy Fen, along the swampy banks of the Lanahatchee River. When it comes to fishing, there are numerous things for players to learn. Different bodies of water and different sized fish require unique lures to catch, and only certain types of fish will be in still versus moving bodies of water. When harvesting plants, players must learn to distinguish herbs by color, shape, and size. Like hunting and fishing, you'll also become familiar with what areas tend to have the herb you want, and what each herb does, whether it helps or harms. Finally, players use the gathered plants to craft or cook things that help you and your horse to survive in the game's unforgiving environment. After spending so much time in-game learning, and out-of-game reflecting on how curious I'd become about ecological knowledge, I wanted to know if other people felt the same connection to nature and desire to dig deeper as I did. So, I took to Reddit and YouTube to see what I could find. On the Red Dead Redemption 2 subreddit, I found countless posts highlighting specific details that players found in-game, from bears bluff charging to eagles catching snakes and fish getting beached on a cliff halfway down a waterfall, allowing players to shortcut the effort of catching them the old-fashioned way. All these instances represent a collection of virtual ecological knowledge specific to the environment within Red Dead Redemption 2 that is being shared among members of the community that engage with the game world. The more time a player spends in-game and engaging with the community, the more they hone their knowledge into lay expertise. The structure and behaviors of this community align it closely with an epistemic community of virtual environmental researchers who conduct trials in-game to continue to amass game knowledge. In addition to Reddit, there are numerous websites archiving knowledge about the game for curious players. This is quite common today, and you're likely to find a community or website for any major game you play. During my research into the Red Dead community on Reddit, I came across several articles focusing on the game's ability to communicate environmental and historical knowledge to its players. Upon further examination of these articles, I found evidence of co-production of virtual environmental knowledge. Instances in which players took deliberate action or made ideological allegiances based on their unique positionalities and experiences in-game. One article, written by a contributor to Audubon magazine, lauds the extensive attention to detail paid towards the catalog of birds, sound design, and the special little surprises, like a fox coming to steal a mallard that he had plucked and left by the river's edge. But the rest of the article read as a conservationist's lament for human destruction of nature and the decline of bird populations. When the author specifically mentioned that the U.S. Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 wouldn't be passed for another 20 years, it was pretty clear. It appears that the author's experiences in-game only reaffirmed his opinions on conservation, which seemed to adhere closely to a Euro-American environmental ethic. I found it fascinating that the interaction with a game could spawn such an expression in support of conservation nonprofits and U.S. environmental policy. The next post I came across linked to an academic article from the University of Exeter, in which researchers sought to understand if Red Dead was teaching players about wildlife through sheer exposure, rather than by design as an educational game. This again told me that people were playing the game and shaping their behaviors, asking questions, and conducting university research studies around the game's virtual environmental knowledge. In this study, co-production is again on display, only this time, virtual environmental knowledge has become the subject of institutional epistemic power. The last article involved a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, that's teaching a class in American history using the narratives of Red Dead as a guide. Of course, the class digs deeper than the game does on many of its topics, but it's obvious that this game is making serious impacts on its players and shaping the epistemic focus of some universities. With these examples, it becomes easy to imagine how this specific virtual ecological knowledge would be valuable to a state or government body looking to design a new agenda for engaging the public in environmentalism and garnering support for conservation. The final thread I came across in my research was the idea that the virtual landscape of Red Dead represented an escape from reality, an immersion into a world far from the worries of life in the 2020s. Rather than deal with the complexities of a global pandemic, certain players preferred to escape into the virtual wilderness. This transition from video game to virtual outdoor recreation was cause for a new line of inquiry into the potential for virtual landscapes to act as vectors for tourism, and more specifically, to support a neoliberal model of conservation. Ecotourism is the proposed neoliberal solution to environmental degradation in which all parties can win. The theory goes that by opening new flows of environmental-minded tourists into exotic or spectacular natural locations, you can support the mission of national parks and the economy of nearby residents. Critics of ecotourism point to its reliance on market mechanisms and private property to achieve its stated goals, both of which are seldom stabilizing forces for the smallholder farms and rural communities involved. Through my research, I recognize the neoliberal character of players' actions and behaviors surrounding Red Dead as an avenue to get outside. Just as patrons of a national park pay a fee to enter and recreate, the players of video games pay the fees associated with accessing the virtual landscape. Their entry into the game world is their ticket to a connection to nature, albeit virtually. To escape these limitations of virtual landscapes, players on Reddit described paying visits to the real-life analogs to their favorite places in-game, such as the Oak Alley Plantation in Louisiana, which closely resembles Braithwaite Manor. This in-game experience is driving the real-life flow of capital into Oak Alley tourism. The biggest beneficiary of this virtual ecotourism, to be certain, is the development companies like Rockstar Productions and their corporate owners, Take-Two Interactive. During the pandemic alone, sales for Red Dead 2 went from about 29 to 43 million copies. Another instance in particular stood out to me. One Redditor loved playing the game so much, they bought property in the California desert to make a real-life version of their favorite spot from the in-game world, Beecher's Hope. When one commenter said, "Damn, the rich really do live in a completely different reality," the original poster responded by saying they weren't rich, but they had saved up every dime to buy the property worth $100,000. Now, regardless of your definition of rich, it's clear that not everyone playing this game has the means to buy property to recreate their favorite virtual environments in real life. These examples are practically one step removed from the virtual ecotourism described by groups such as Vicotourism. The kind of experiences they have cultivated for people to experience nature in an immersive way through digital technologies is highly aligned with the experience of playing the game, and in some cases, it goes further by using tech like VR headsets to observe animals in the quote-unquote wild. Other video games, such as the newer releases in the Assassin's Creed series, have been similarly described as realistic to the point of being a good stand-in for the real thing. Their latest releases even include a museum mode to explore ancient Greece and Egypt, with included content from experts in those fields. It's certain that video game technology has developed to the point of extreme realism, and as a result, has created complex reflections of our reality. It also appears that how players act and interact with the virtual landscapes in blockbuster video games shape how they act and interact with the real world. What potential this discovery holds for the future of video games and environmental knowledge is uncertain, but it's bound to be contested by university researchers, corporate game manufacturers, and online gaming communities alike.